On today's episode, I give you tips on how you can create your podcast without having to rely on a script. And I travel all the way over to an island off the coast of France to have a conversation all about podcasting. Let's jump in.
Sound matters. Be heard. Welcome to the podcast where you get exclusive behind-the-scenes tips to make your own show sound truly spectacular. This is Podtastic Audio.
Hey, what's happening? How are you doing today? I want to say thank you so much for being here. I am Chris, and I am from the original Chris and Christine Show podcast. You can find out every single thing you want to know about that show on a website which I built at chrisandchristineshow.com. Yeah, that makes sense, right? Okay, it is in the show notes of this very episode. If you want to scroll on down, there it is. But here, we're talking all about podcasting, and I'm sure you have a podcast, or maybe, just maybe, you're on the fence of maybe starting a podcast, and you're like, well, I don't know. Should I podcast? What am I going to podcast about? How do I make it sound so easy and natural? How do you even do this, Chris? How do you make it even happen without having to write down an entire script and just read it word for word? Because I do know that a lot of podcasters, maybe you're one of them, that actually just reads every single thing into your microphone. You just read it off this paper, off the script there. But what if I were to tell you, I have 3 key tips that you maybe can use for creating a podcast without having to rely on that script? Are you ready? Well, here they are. Coming in with tip number 1, well, maybe instead of a script, just use an outline. Outline some key points, some talking points that you're going to talk about in your discussion. Use it more like a guide than a straight up script. This will ensure a structured and focused conversation without the constraints of a full script. Because when you read a script, sometimes we trip over things, and we actually talk differently than we actually read. And there's certain syllables, if you butt them up together in the script, they can be like a tongue twister. You know what I'm saying. So moving on to tip number 2, and that is you got to practice, and practice importantly with some improv. If you know a little improvisation, maybe perhaps you can actually develop some skills to really think on your feet, express clear ideas smoothly and easily, and adapt a natural flow to the conversation. This will help maintain a natural and engaging podcast without the need to rely on reading a physical script. And if you have a somewhat of a script, you always can go off script a little bit. And if it sounds natural with some easy improv, then perhaps maybe your listeners won't even know the difference whether you're reading or not reading, and it won't sound so scripted like it might already. So the very third and last tip I have here on how to create a podcast without relying on a script is to be authentic. You want to embrace your authenticity by speaking from the heart, sharing personal experiences that are scripted and written down for you, and letting your personality shine through. This connection with your audience can make the podcast more relatable and enjoyable, because we all want a show that is easy on the ears and possibly the eyes if you do video too. But we're talking audio only here. We want your show to sound amazing, and we want your listeners to really gravitate to the things you are saying and get your information from you and nobody else. So today on Podtastic Audio, I took a journey all the way over to the UK and landed on a little island of Jersey, which Jersey is their own country. And on the island of Jersey, I ran into Verity Sangan, who has a podcast about podcasting like I do. It is the Lazy Girl's Guide to Podcasting. And we talked all about podcasting, her podcast, what she thinks about podcasting. It was a fantastic conversation, and I'm very excited to share with you right now my conversation with Verity from the Lazy Girl's Guide to Podcasting. You do podcasting. We all like to do podcasting. I love podcasting myself. So when did you decide to get your feet wet in the podcasting space?
Oh my gosh, that's such a good question. It was a couple of years ago, and I just randomly, and it was very random, that I was like, I'm just going to start a podcast. And I don't even know what spurred the idea. And I started it in maternity leave. It was my first podcast, and it was very much a ride or die kind of, let's just figure it out and see what happens. And I just totally fell in love with the medium. And I just found that I found this amazing podcast community online, which was just the nicest group of people that I felt I could have possibly fallen into. And as time went by, I did that podcast for about 15 months. And I found I was getting more and more people coming to me saying, Verity, how do I podcast? Or I would love to start a podcast, but it seems way too difficult. And I was like, actually, it's really not. I do what I call, I've kind of like dubbed the term grassroots podcasting. I don't think that's a thing, but it's what I call it. But what I mean by that is that I don't have a crazy expensive tech setup. It's not overly complicated at all. And I just like to try and show people that actually you can podcast with a very small budget and with limited tech know-how. And just, my podcast started from my bedroom, and I'm now on my second podcast because the first one, it kind of ran its it ran its time, and it needs a bit of a break. So it's been on hiatus for about 6 months whilst I kind of figure out where to go with it. But I've got my second podcast going now, which is very unoriginally all about podcasting. And it's just how-to tips for how to start a podcast without a massive budget and loads of tech know-how, really.
Well, it sounds like you and I both had the same journey when it comes to podcasting, because I started a show with it was my girlfriend at the time, now wife, but we started the Chris Christine show. We still do it. We haven't been an episode in maybe a few weeks or so, but people were asking me questions like, how do you do that? Like, how are you making that happen and all that stuff? And I'm like, well, I already have the gear. I already kind of know what I'm doing. Let me just make a second podcast. And I know you're thinking like, well, Chris, isn't it kind of hard to do 2 podcasts? Yes, yes, it is. But the second podcast, the Podtastic Audio on this one, I was kind of at first thinking like, well, it'll just be like the throwaway, whatever episodes. I won't put much thought into it. I'll just like ramble into the microphone, give my tips of the week or whatever, and then just go from there. But it kind of exploded, and now I have to take it a little more seriously than I did when I first started, because it was kind of
weird, isn't it, how things like that work out? Because I would say I'm exactly the same. I had so much intention of only having like a month break or something from my other podcast. I'm like, there's very much been 6 months now, and it's weird how those things work out, isn't it?
What was the other podcast about?
It was about business and entrepreneurship, mainly females in business, and just really shining a light on a lot of topics that I felt weren't being talked about a lot. So I feel like there's a lot of, podcast episodes out there where people talk about building your email list and, these kind of more common topics. And there's nothing wrong with that, because those topics still need to be covered. But I was finding that there weren't a lot of episodes or information where people were talking about like the data protection, the terms and conditions, the legalities, the nitty gritty, boring stuff of marketing, all of these things that were still really important for building a business. But I just found there wasn't much conversation around them. So I was like, well, let's make the conversation then. And I ended up having the privilege of interviewing some absolutely incredible people. I got at one point we had an international lawyer on and all sorts of incredible people. It was really, really fun to do. But I think also, like I said, we did it weekly. I say we, I mean me, myself and I, but we did it weekly for 15 months. And so in about 60 odd episodes, or however much it came to, I felt like I kind of got to a point where it's not that the conversation was drying up, but I was like, it needs to have a break so that the conversation is fresh and it doesn't just go for the sake of going it for, if that makes sense.
Right. Now, did you do interviews every episode, or did you do solos, or did you break them up, or what'd you do?
Well, for the first, I'm trying to think, the first couple of months, I would say maybe the first 4 to 6 episodes were just me. And then we did a solid nearly year of interviews, which was great, don't get me wrong, but it's you'll know, it's very tiring from an editing point of view, and all the background that goes into getting somebody on your show, particularly if you don't really know them and you don't really have a rapport with them. It's having that conversation first, isn't it? To kind of convince somebody to come onto your podcast.
Right.
Which could be an interesting conversation sometimes. But so it was quite tiring. And then after, I would say for the last 3 months, I started tandeming them between an episode of an interview and then a solo interview, solo. But yeah, it just kind of came to a bit of a natural pause, I think.
I think that works really well when you do the breaking it up interview solo or try to do a mixture of both or things. I know there's some shows, a lot of shows out there that do exclusively interview only. And like you were saying about having to find the guest and get a rapport with the guest and get them to come on your show and trying to go back and forth and set times and even setting times with us, being that we're 8 hours apart, trying to figure out those kind of things can be a little tricky. It can be very tricky, but there's some shows that will just take on anybody because they just do interviews only. And I know it's difficult because first time I ever did a solo show was with this show. And it was, and I just probably almost like a car crash, just ran through it real quick and just kind of mumbled over things and kind of quickly went through my material as quickly as I could just to get through it because I'm not used to being the only person talking on the microphone. There's kind of skill to being a solo podcaster without having to read a script. Because I know a lot of people do that. They'll focus on a script and they'll just read right through it word for word. And you can kind of tell that they are reading just by listening. You can tell. I mean, I've listened to enough things and hear that when you can tell when someone's physically reading the script versus just talking to the audience directly, which I think is more personal and should be how it's done. Not everybody does it that way. But do you read scripts when you do your show, or do you off the cuff, or do you notate? How do you do it?
That's a great question. So for the first podcast, it was always completely off the cuff and just maybe a couple of bullet points. And then when I started my new podcast, The Lazy Girl's Guide to Podcasting, I did actually think for the first couple of episodes, I was like, do you know what? I'm going to try this whole scripting gig. And I did a few episodes like that and I hated it. And I have got so much respect to people who can read from a script and make it sound engaging and natural, because for me, it sounded exactly like you're saying. It sounds like I read it, and it just doesn't sound very much like me, because I'm the kind of person who I'll be chatting and then all of a sudden a thought will pop into my head and I'll be like, oh, do you know what? I wasn't even going to talk about this on this episode, but now this is the tangent that I'm running off on. And I actually found the script quite restrictive. I know for some people, they find it quite liberating because there's so much confidence there, because they don't have to second guess themselves. They just read. But for me, I actually found it quite restrictive for my creativity and my personality. So what I tend to do going into an episode now is I will either have a 1-sentence topic of this is what I'm covering in this episode, or maybe at most I might have a few bullet points, but I would say I tend to use bullet points only when there's maybe really technical information where I'm like, I absolutely cannot muck this bit up because it's
right.
so technical, and somebody will come after me and be like, no, Verity, that's 100% wrong.
Right.
So I tend to go with the bullet points now. But it was interesting trying out with the script, but just for me as a personality, not for me going forward.
Well, what I was saying about about having the guests on the show is that I find that guest interviews are fairly easy. They're almost like a crutch for a lot of these podcasts that do the guest interviews only kind of thing, because you got to find out some information about the guest. You might write down a few bullet points about the guest, a couple questions, or maybe you have already your pre-written questions that you use for every guest that you can just kind of reword different things, like how'd they make you feel? What was your first idea in business, or that kind of just basic generic questions that you can be used for anybody. You might just use those and have the same list and have a different guest on every episode, and you just read the questions. And I can't stand the shows when they have guests on and they're just literally just like a job interview you're watching.
Yes. Or do you know what? The ones that, I need to say this, but the ones where they're like, so tell me about yourself. And you listen to this 15-minute autobiography and then you're like, I've got no idea why. What? Just, I find it so troubling to listen to.
I know. We all fall into those pitfalls.
Do you know the ones I mean, though? You go in, you find an episode, and you're like, this is going to be amazing. And somebody opens up. Oh, gosh, it sounds like I'm hating on podcasters. I'm not at all, because I've been guilty of doing this as well. So I will happily hold my hands up. And it's when, like I said, somebody gives you their 15-minute autobiography and you're there thinking, you could have edited a lot of this out or directioned it. But then again, that was a skill that I learned in myself to actually say, give me a brief intro as to what it is that you do in your business, really target that question as opposed to just being, hey, Chris, tell me about you. And then you're like,
well, when I
don't know. Well, when I was 5, I had a dog. And then in 6th grade, this happened.
Yeah. I get that. But unless it kind of like, if it ties into why they're here, like a little bit, like why are you here today? And also, I think a lot of people forget to think that there's an audience actually listening to this. And what do they want to hear is really what you should be serving. You're serving your audience first. I know it's all fun and games to play podcasting with your buddies in the basement and talk comic books and stuff. That's great. That's fun and all. But does the audience listening, do they come here for that? Maybe not. I don't know. I guess at the end of the day, the statistics and the download numbers really are going to prove whether or not people are engaged. And you can look in your statistics, you can see how long people have listened to. Have you ever really dug into that stuff, like the length of a listener?
Yes, I get so bogged down with it because I'm such an analytical nut, if that's even a phrase to give myself. Yeah, I do. What I tend to do is I tend to only dig down that deep about once a month, just because I find that it's quite a time-consuming process and because I get really fascinated by it. And then I try and find links between different things. And I'm like, well, why is that happening on Spotify? But it happens like this on Apple, but then this is what happens on a different platform. And I find it's one of those things that I can only do it probably about once a month. Otherwise, I could turn it into a full-time job just staring at analytics. But I do find it really interesting, I have to say.
Well, people do get very, I don't know, they worry about their data and their stats. They keep looking at their numbers as if they're going to change on a daily basis or an hourly basis.
Yeah.
They're going to stare at them. And people get really worried if they don't hit this number or that number and this thing. I look at numbers too, but for me, more importantly than the numbers is actually feedback. If I get responses, that was a good episode, or ask questions about the episode, like emails or however they message me, that's worth like 100 or 1,000 downloads as far as I'm concerned. I'd rather get one email than 1,000 generic plays and nobody even listen care less about. But
definitely.
Feedback is very important. But you don't always have to if a listener says, "Oh, you need to do this other bit or you need to do this other thing," you don't always have to do everything they say. If it does not fit your show and your brand, then don't even worry about doing it. Say thank you, but no thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it always goes back to the point as well that when people start getting, bogged down with numbers, it's that idea of, well, why are you striving for those numbers in the first place? Because that isn't the only definition of success when it comes to podcasting. And I had this conversation with somebody once and they were like, well, what do you mean? How else can a podcast be successful? I was like, well, for some people, just having a time frame of saying every single week I'm putting out an episode, that could mean that your show is successful as far as you're concerned because you're sticking to that, that schedule. And I think sometimes we just get so bogged down with numbers, which I get. We live in a world where you go on YouTube and you see these stats, you go on TikTok and you see all these views and what have you. I completely get it. But I think people need to remember that numbers aren't everything. Like you said, it's there's the connection element as well. And sometimes it's just doing it for yourself just because you like podcasting.
Yeah. I love this whole medium. And I think that some people, they give up early on podcasting because they do not see giant numbers or even, they want to make some money. And then usually, what is it, about episode 7 or 10 is when they fall out. So,
yeah.
So what do you think are some of the reasons why people actually give up on their podcast?
I think a lot of it is that people don't appreciate that podcasting is a labor of love, or it is for me at least. And I think that there's 2 major elements that come into that. First of all is the numbers. I think we are really used to, as I said, in the world of TikTok and, that whole instant gratification, seeing things go viral. And I think people disappreciate how challenging, I'm not going to say difficult, but how challenging it can be to grow a podcast. I saw somewhere, I don't know how true it is, it could just be their speculation, but I did see a tweet recently where somebody was saying, podcasting is the hardest medium to grow. And, to a degree, I agree with them because, you don't go to Apple Podcasts and use it as a search engine the same as you do for YouTube or a social media platform or what have you. So, you don't have the discoverability as easily as other platforms. And I think because of that, you don't necessarily see growth that you can see on other platforms or immediate growth. Podcast growth tends to be a lot smaller, unless you're a big name or a big brand who happens to have a large following beforehand. But even then it can be challenging. So I think a lot of people give up because they don't see that kind of instant success and, that instant gratification. But I think the other reason, from what I've seen and talking to people, is the appreciation for how much time actually goes into podcasting. I think it's really easy to assume that you pick up the microphone and you say something which sounds amazing for at least 45 minutes, and then it gets put out on the airwaves, as it were, and into all these podcast directories, and it's just awesome, which I'm sure it will be. But I think people completely disappreciate how much you might need to research an episode, how the editing can look like, even down to silly things like, creating thumbnails, because there's been a push at the moment. We know that Spotify will have a little thumbnail similar to a YouTube thumbnail. So, is that something that you're adding into your podcasting process, for example? Do you need to change your intro or outro for that particular episode? What are your show notes going to look like? Do you know what I mean? It's just, there's such an endless list, it can feel like, in production or post-production sometimes, and then all the marketing that goes with it, that I think people just disappreciate what the process can look like. And don't get me wrong, I say the process like it's this massive thing, and some people have got a really short podcasting process. Some people seems to go on and on and on. Mine seems to go on forever, I swear. But it is remembering that however long or short it is, at the end of the day, it's not just recording an episode. And I think that's why people give up, is because it is more of a process than I think a lot of people realize, particularly that marketing bit. I have conversations with people where they're like, oh, I've created this amazing episode. And I'm like, great, who have you told? And they go, well, I put this tweet up. And I was like, right, but how many people statistically saw that one tweet? Like, did you tell your friends? Did you tell your family? Oh, no, they wouldn't be interested. Well, how do you know they're not interested? Like, go shout it from the rooftops and tell everybody. I mean, I phoned up a friend this morning at work. So he was at work. And do you know the first thing he said to me was, when am I going to be on your podcast?
Wow.
He's not interested in podcasting, but he knows that I'm into podcasting because I shout about it on like all of my social media platforms. So I was like, yes, that's the kind of reaction that I want. I don't care that you don't listen to it. You know that I do it. So you might tell somebody else who might come and listen to my show, for example.
Right. It's like word of mouth is, I heard it's like the number one way that podcasts get like found is word of mouth through other people.
Yes.
So like a friend of yours says, hey, I heard this cool podcast. You might go check it out, versus, I mean, because you trust that person, that person personally. And it's kind of funny at work. People have known I've done podcasting for a while. So people I've run into, and it was funny just maybe a week or two ago, as a guy I haven't seen in like over a year or so, I was talking to him and he says, hey, are you still doing like the YouTuber? Because he doesn't know YouTube from podcasting. I think it's all the same. So he says, hey, are you still doing the YouTube thing show? You still do YouTube? Like, I said, yeah. Yeah.
Why not?
Yeah, I'm like, sure. Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. Because he heard it from, I guess either he heard it from me or heard it from somebody else. I don't remember how it got to him, but it's kind of interesting how people like I'll run into, haven't seen in a while, and they'll remember me as like the podcast guy or YouTube guy or things like that. And speaking of YouTube, so you do a video YouTube version and an audio version of your podcast. Are they the exact same thing? Is one edited more than the other?
Nope, they are the exact same thing, which I will say is probably why it doesn't do so well on YouTube, because I don't optimize it for YouTube at all. I really, really don't. I think I just put it on YouTube, to be honest with you, because it's another platform where I can reach people.
Yeah, they say use YouTube as more of like a discoverability platform than like a consuming platform. And I think, I do an audio only show, and I've toyed with doing video of some sort. I'm set up for video, and I can do lots of different variations of video if I wanted to. It's just that I personally, I don't think I have the time to really invest in double duty for one episode. And I kind of look at it like this. It's like I was telling somebody the same thing is that I know in the UK, you guys have Netflix over there and Hulu and things
We do.
Okay, great. Okay. So if somebody had a choice between watching just sitting here talking in front of the computer video or the latest thing on Netflix, if you had a choice between the two of them, which one do you think they're going to use? They're going to go to Netflix, and by all means, please go to Netflix. Don't waste your time watching me when there's already an audio version of it that you can listen to it while you're on your commute to work or doing the dishes or physically doing something else. So I look at podcasting as like, at least the audio version of podcasting is I'm giving you information while you are physically still doing something that's productive. Because at the end of the day, if you get off work, what are you going to do? You don't watch the television. You're not going to watch some Yahoo on YouTube talking into the camera for an hour when you can watch your favorite show or whatever. So, and I know during the pandemic, I know when everyone was locked down, video was massive because a lot of people were just home staring at screens all day. So to them, it was like no big deal. But in my line of work, I'm not in front of a computer, so I'm on the go. So I have to listen to audio more. Audio is my go-to for everything. So that's probably
I was just going to say, I think that's a really interesting point that you were saying as well, that you're listening to the podcast on the go, because we know as well that statistically people listen to podcasts when they're doing something, mainly commuting. And, for a lot of people on their commutes, yes, okay, some people get public transport, but then a lot of people will be driving. So as you said, that, they're not watching a screen at that point, or, if you're doing the dishes or the housework or what have you, your consumption of media is through audio, not the visual. So I think that kind of gets disappreciated. And don't get me wrong, like I said, I know that YouTube is popular or hugely popular. And we know that video is so popular as well. But I think that it's remembering where and how people consume the audio, and that's where podcasting has really got its place. I don't know, I think that gets forgotten about sometimes, but yeah, no, I completely agree with you. I use the YouTube much more for discoverability, because I'm always like, go to my website, go check out the podcast, as opposed to anything else, because it is just a copy and paste of what's on the podcast, and even down to the show notes are identical. So yeah, there's probably YouTube purists out there who are listening to this and just screaming, being like, no, Verity, what are you doing?
Yeah, well, I know my show I host with Libsyn, and I know that there is a feature built into their Libsyn hosting where it automatically shoots it over to YouTube for you. So I do,
cool.
But I have like no listeners, no viewers on my YouTube because I never really. It's just a still image of the graphic, and then like the audio. It's all it is. It's just a player or whatever, which is fine. It's just on there just to be on there. But I get like literally no traffic at all. So I'm like, whatever with that. I know that, speaking of YouTube, what's kind of funny is that I was in YouTube years and years prior to even thinking about podcasting. I was doing YouTube first. And the only reason I did YouTube was because it was a new place to physically put videos that I could share with my family. Because the videos, the video files themselves are bigger because you can't email them. They're so big, right? No. So I would say I got into YouTube before Google bought it. I have a YouTube channel way back then, and
it was very back in the day.
It was very back in the day. It was when it was like, we're talking like maybe 2008-ish, 2007-ish, somewhere around there. And I just put like and this is totally like low quality resolution because we didn't have HD cameras back then. It was like low res, and I would put videos on my YouTube channel. And what's funny about YouTube, people don't think about this, is actually YouTube is a social media platform.
Okay.
Just like Instagram and Facebook and all the rest, and what gets you out about YouTube is that I know people get deplatformed from things all the time. YouTube's got a 3-strike rule. I've gotten a couple strikes myself by putting music I shouldn't have on my videos and things like that. And they can deplatform you for any reason at all. So why put all your eggs into the one YouTube basket? And also they put their ads in their videos and all that stuff. And YouTube is weird. If you ever watch YouTube, you'll notice that there's a column to the right side or down below, whatever platform you're watching the YouTube on, of other videos that you should also watch that you're not subscribed to. So I was kind of wondering, like, they say subscribe to my YouTube channel, subscribe. But even if you don't subscribe, your video is going to people that aren't subscribed, or you're seeing videos that you're not subscribed to. So what's the point of subscribing? Because I can I'm watching things or being fed things that I'm not subscribed to, versus a podcast. Like, I'm only going to see things in my podcast player that I'm physically subscribed to. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, 100%. And I think that's a really interesting point, because that's one thing that I've noticed is that if we're looking at YouTube, I don't actually subscribe to a lot of channels, because you're right. It's how the algorithm works, that because I've watched X amount of, videos from a certain YouTuber, they will automatically be on my For You page or front page or whatever we call it. But yeah, that is the beauty of podcasting, is that you only get the shows that you're subscribing to, which I actually quite love, because then you can curate rather these kind of like playlists as to how whatever it is that you want to listen to. I don't know if you've come across Good Pods yet.
Yeah, I'm on Good Pods.
Oh my God, I'm obsessed with it. I love it.
Honestly, like I've been ranked number one in Good Pods for I don't know how many weeks or whatever, and I bounce around the charts between like top 5, top 1. I'm not even sure, but I rarely use them to listen to I'm pretty much a diehard Apple fanboy, so I just stick with Apple Podcasts, because it's what
Fair enough.
Which is what I've learned. It's what I've grew up on, and I have an iPhone. I've had iPhones forever and stuff. Now I have a MacBook, so I just stick with that, And I'm on Good Pods, and I'll give it a play, and I'll share it from there and things like that. But I don't know if you have this problem or not, but with Good Pods, I was trying to share it to Instagram Reels or Instagram Stories or whatever it is, and it kept giving me an error code. And I talked to the guys over there, and they said they fixed it, and they did fix it for like a minute, but then I started doing it again. So
oh no,
yeah, but I do listen on there, and I'm not heavily involved on Good Pods as I probably should be, because I have 2 different shows and 2 different accounts and 2 different things, and I'm trying to juggle all this stuff. But I know that it's kind of like a social media for podcasters.
Yeah, which it's cool. I think the thing that I like the most about it is that I can just create a playlist. I find sometimes I'm with you. I'm a diehard Apple, Mac, iPhone girl as well. I love it. But that I would find the drawback for me for Apple Podcasts, because I love Apple Podcasts. It is my go-to. But I just find it not as user-friendly as it possibly could be. I don't know. Maybe that's just me and how my brain's wired, but I like the layout of Good Pods better. It's odd, isn't it? How like our brains are just like different, and how different interfaces suit different people. It's interesting, isn't it? It
is interesting. Hey, speaking of different interfaces, have you seen the new Apple podcast player with the integrated actual artwork they have now?
Yes, I've seen it, but mine doesn't actually come up with that, and I don't know whether or not.
Yours does, because I'm subscribed to your show. Shout out. And I see your logo, your episode artwork does show up in the Apple player thing. It shows right in there with all the other ones.
See, that's really interesting, because on mine, I'm literally flicking through my phone now as we're talking, which is awful, isn't it? I'm on my phone whilst we're talking.
That's okay. I'm on mine too. I'm looking at mine.
I'm opening up mine right now, and the individual artwork is not there. So I'm wondering whether or not that's like an update that they only have in the States at the moment or something, maybe.
Maybe I have to refresh.
It might not be. It might just be my phone.
It may be. What iPhone do you have?
14.
Okay, well, it's a new phone. Did you update to the most recent update they had, 17 point whatever it is?
Yeah, I have.
Okay. Well, are other shows showing up with their individual artwork when you subscribe? We look at them in your player?
No, it's just that one, but it obviously works, because over on Spotify, it does it on Spotify.
Yeah, it's always done on Spotify. That was kind of a new thing, but
I'm wondering whether or not it's a British thing. Please, if anybody is listening who is also in Britain, please let me know if it's a British thing that we haven't got this update yet, or if it is just my phone.
Well, it does look
need to know.
It does look very slick. Let me tell you, I like it. It looks great. They do chop off the bottom section to put some graphics and some other. The way it looks is that it looks very nice when it's done correctly. But you gotta remember the top section is going to be more visible on. I just closed it on the Apple Podcast player. Yeah, top middle section. The bottom section is more kind of covered up with the description of your episode and things like that. So, but I like it. It's not, now this is not necessary. Not everybody has to do individual artwork for episodes. I started doing it with the Chris and Christine show early on, and I thought I didn't know you can even do that. But with me is that Apple Podcasts never did this. So since I only listen to Apple Podcasts, I never saw it. So I didn't know it was even a thing until I went to Spotify one day and I played one of our episodes over there, and I said, wait a second, the graphic is over there too? I said, how cool is that? And then I have Apple CarPlay in my truck, so I plugged my truck into the vehicle. It was showing it on the dash too. I was like, that's super, super cool. So how important do you think is to have episode artwork for a podcast?
That's a really interesting question. And I'm not sure it is that important, to be honest with you. I think one of the biggest reasons why, well, I'll tell you why I started it, was because it came to my attention when was it, a few months ago. So I was like, well, let's try it. Let's see and run like a really non-scientific experiment and see if it actually makes any difference, compared to my episodes without episode artwork. And I can't honestly say that I've seen any difference. And I guess what I mean is because I said the words like an awful lot there, didn't I? And not really come up with a point. But when you're scrolling through Spotify, you can see the different episode artwork. So I thought, well, maybe that will interest people in different episodes. But to be honest with you, I've seen the growth correlate more with when I do different pushes on social media as opposed to the episode artwork. I think one of the reasons why, or I know the only reason I keep it up is because I'm creating a thumbnail for the episode for YouTube.
Right.
And then because I do it in Canva, it literally takes 5 seconds for me to just resize it and download it for the podcast. So for me, it's like an extra minutes worth of work. Do you know what I mean? To just convert, download, and then upload it. But if I wasn't doing that for YouTube, I'm kind of in two minds if I'd carry on doing the episode artwork, because for me, I don't know, maybe I'm doing it wrong, but I personally have not seen any difference. I don't know.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm not sure. What's your opinion? I'd be interested to know.
Yeah, see, I started doing it, and I've evolved since then. I have a Canva account too, but I rarely even use it. And but I discovered since we have iPhones here, a couple of different apps I've used to create. I do all my artwork on my phone on the apps, because this way I can kind of do it from the couch. I can do it from anywhere I'm sitting. I have to be at the computer, that kind of thing. Because not always in front of the computer. So the more things I can do on the go, the better when it comes to that. Except for recording, you shouldn't record with your iPhone. You should use a microphone really for that kind of stuff. Yeah. But there's a couple apps I use where I kind of discovered that I kind of play around with creating a generic kind of a colored canvas to kind of like within the app I use as the background. Then I'll stick like the logo of my podcast or the other podcast. And if I have a guest, I'll try to stick their logo or image somewhere on I kind of like start sticking. It's probably the same as Canva too, I'm guessing. Sticking different things. And then I'll have another app I use to create the lettering for the graphic that kind of goes over the top of it too. And then I'll save that on my phone, and they'll have a copy of it there, because it's important it's on my phone, because then I can instantly send it to Twitter, to Instagram, to whatever, and use that as like the face of the episode. So people are drawn to visuals first on social media platforms. It's kind of the way usually it works. So like they always say, don't judge a book by its cover, but everybody does. They look at it and they say, I want to watch that. So, or read that. So same thing with episode artwork. I try to find something that I try to make something that looks cool and fun, something kind of about the episode. And it does, like I said, it doesn't take me very long. Even on my phone, I can do this in a few minutes. And I'll do that, I'll create that. Then I will Apple AirDrop that thing to my computer, because it's important to have it on your computer, because when you do upload that to your media host with your show, it sends it with it. That way it can go on to Spotify and Good Pods, and even now Apple, it can be on there too as a graphic artwork. And that graphic artwork kind of stays with that episode. And to me, it's very basic. It's not a lot of words or a lot of different graphics. I try to keep it simple, but different than the last episode. So it kind of keeps them separate. Like, this is a different episode than the last one. And you can kind of tie them together. And that's kind of why I do it, really. It helps with marketing your show across the different social medias, because it does differentiate this episode from the other episodes. If that makes kind of sense. That's kind of why I do it,
Yeah, no, and I love that. I think that's great. And I mean, I've had fun with it as well, of like doing different themes. And I don't know. I'll be interested to see how it evolves because, well, particularly as I'm, like I said, on Apple, I can't even see other people's, which I'm now going to have to Google, find out whether or not that's a British only thing. Because I've realized recently, have you got onto having, you know, how you can upload your RSS feed to TikTok?
No, I'm not on TikTok. Well, I had an account.
Oh, okay.
I had an account, but I was playing with TikTok one day, and I'm like, I'm already sucked into the Instagram Reels, which I think is very similar to TikTok. But I was like,
Yeah.
I'm already on Reels, and I already got accounts over there. And I'm already comfortable with the way Reels works. And I was like, well, it's the same thing. So do I really need it? So then I just deleted it. I wouldn't use
That's
it.
fair enough. No, but there's a feature now on TikTok where you can, when you go to upload a video, you can upload your RSS feed instead. So then you can have your podcast go automatically to TikTok. And that's meant to be an interesting update that they're going to be working on more in 2024, actually having it as a podcast directory. But again, I think this is because I'm in Britain. I don't have it as a feature, and it's really upsetting me.
Oh, well, don't let it get you down. You know, I mean, your podcast will do fine, I'm sure. It's not the one. I know a guy. I'm not going to shout him out, but I know a guy that's constantly jumping on the new shiny toy. So whether it's TikTok or whether it's Threads, oh my gosh, he was telling me all about Threads when Threads came out, and I'm like,
oh, don't talk to me about Threads.
And I was like, really? Do we need another? I mean, we already have Twitter or X or what do you want to call it these days? I'm like, okay, I'll play along, but I'm like, if this thing dies in a week, I'm gonna be like, what?
Do you know what, though? There was this amazing statistic about Threads. Oh, I can't even remember it now. But there was this you know how there was this statistic about how it was like the fastest growing social media platform
in one day, right?
Exactly. But then there was also a statistic which came out, and I can't remember exactly what it was, but I think it was something like 3 weeks later, the percentage of people who wouldn't, even though they were on Threads because they had an account, but they weren't actually actively using the platform. And I was like, wow, that's really staggering because I think it's shown that I don't know, in my opinion, I didn't really see the need for it in the first place. Because like you said, we've got Twitter or X or whatever they're calling it this week. And we've got Instagram, we've got TikTok, and I couldn't really see the need for Threads. It was just a bit of a bizarre one, I think, but I don't know, wasn't a fan of it.
Yeah, I mean, I have it, and I'll post an episode over there, and that's really all I'll do with it. It's another place to post something, and that's about it. Like, I don't do any kind of like conversations on there or anything like that. I'm kind of bad when it comes to social media. I kind of get into one. I'll kind of stick with the one I'm using but I know there are some people that have to go on every different device, different kind of platform. They're trying new different things, and they're trying to get themselves spread out extremely thin. And if you got time to do it and a marketing budget to pull that off, I guess go right ahead. But for most of indie podcasters, we're doing it as a one-man show. I know for you too, you're doing it all yourself.
Absolutely.
You don't have time to go out and try to push out to, a gazillion different platforms and try to, get accounts in all these different places and try to, be everywhere to everybody and all this other stuff. So I know that some people that they'll try to, obviously I keep hearing this a lot. Have you had any luck making any kind of money podcasting, and what are the best ways to make money? I know you did an episode recently on that, but can you very briefly here, can you say what are your top ways that you think let's say indie podcaster, I'm not talking experts, I'm not talking big shows, I'm talking like indie shows. What are your best advice on us indie podcasters to make any kind of money with a podcast?
I think that's a really interesting question. I would say this is the most wishy-washy answer I think I could possibly give. But I would say whatever aligns with you as an individual and also with your audience. So that is a terrible answer, but I'll give you some examples. Like, if I look at my own audience, for example, and also me as an individual. So we were chatting a little bit before we started recording, and in my kind of professional life away from podcasting, I'm a health and social care lecturer. I've been in teaching for years now. And teaching and mentoring and coaching is something that comes quite naturally to me, probably because of that. So because of that, I naturally default to coaching and mentoring and monetizing through coaching and mentoring for my podcast. And I find that that's what my podcast audience wants from me. However, there's going to be other people who that might not fit their show, or it might not fit their personality. And actually for them, a better way of monetizing would be to create merch, because they are just really amazing at selling more of a physical product than a service. And also they might have an amazing slogan. There's, I can't think what the guy's called now. That's really going to annoy Adam. Surname begins with an S. Brilliant podcast business school. But he's got like this slogan that he gets printed on t-shirts, which is, your mum listens to my podcast.
Oh, yeah.
And so for, that's brilliant. He's got a slogan. His audience clearly love it because they buy the merch. He's great at advertising it. So, that works really, really well for him. So I think it's what does your audience want? What does your audience expect? And also, what are you happy delivering? Because there's no point you delivering something that your audience doesn't want, but then there's also no point in giving something that your audience wants that you're not happy to promote and deliver. It's all about like being value aligned, really, isn't it? So, and it might be that you just experiment with a few different things. Like I said, I know that coaching is my kind of go-to. It's what's been the most profitable for me. I am currently trialing with ads and inserted ads within the podcast. I'm kind of in two minds about it, whether or not it works for me. And then the other thing that I'm going to start dabbling in is podcast merch as well. So it's just about playing around, I think, sometimes, and being willing to learn and also experiment with different things, because what works for one audience isn't going to work for the other audience. And also figuring out who your audience listens to and what their kind of habits are, because if they're listening to similar podcasts and similar spaces, but they're already buying a load of merch maybe from another podcaster, are they necessarily gonna do that with you as well? So it's kind of looking at what is that space looking like for your audience. Yeah, that's a very wishy-washy answer, isn't it?
Yeah, well, it's a wishy-washy world, let me tell you. It's it comes to podcasting. I know that, but all of that you just said really depends on one key factor, and that key factor is you have to have an audience.
Yes.
Because you can't monetize dust. You can try.
No, that's true.
So you have to have, and I think, I hate to say this, but people think that I've got 100 listeners that I'm gonna get 100 people buying my stuff. You might get one or two, maybe three if you're lucky.
Yeah.
Usually it's like 3% at the most. It depends, what it is. 3% of your audience is actually going to physically purchase whatever it is you're going to sell them or offer them, whether it's a Patreon subscription or or even like merch, or like you're saying, or stickers or whatever. And speaking of Adam was on my show. I forget what episode it was. I'll send you a link to it. He was a great guest. It was fun having him on the show, and that was fun. Fun episode. But yeah, I mean, people try to make money any way they can with podcasting. And I think that's why a lot of shows fail, is because they think like, I haven't made $1 and I'm on episode 3. I should be making, why am I making any money? I don't get this, like my show's great. Mom says it's great. I mean, it's,
maybe that should be the merch that you sell. Literally, my mum thinks my podcast is awesome. I'm gonna trademark that.
They get a T-shirt of. I think I'm gonna get a T-shirt of that too. Yeah, my mom thinks it's, or maybe even better, your mom thinks it's great. I think that'd be a good one too. Well, Verity, this has been so fantastic having you come on the show today. I really appreciate you stopping by today. So, where can everybody find out all about you and all of your wonderful stuff?
Oh, bless you. Thank you. It's been so much fun being here and chatting away. So the best ways to find me is listen to my podcast, The Lazy Girl's Guide to Podcasting, which is pretty much everywhere where I can put it at the moment. So go and listen to that. Otherwise, at Verity Sangan on Twitter and at Lazy Girl Pod on TikTok. Those are probably the two places where I spend the most of my time.
Fantastic. Well, do you have any last words to entice our audience before we let you go here?
I would just say, if you're thinking of starting a podcast, just go for it, because you've got nothing to lose. And if you've got a podcast and you're not really sure if it's going in the direction that you want it to go in, I would say just stop stressing about it and just enjoy the medium, because it is a fun medium if you just let go of all of these expectations, because most of the time you'll realize that most of the expectations you're just putting in place your own way, really, and putting in place of your own happiness and your own fun with it. So just enjoy podcasting for the medium that it is.
Hey, thank you once again for listening to this episode today. I really, really appreciate it. That makes me smile so much. But you know what would make me very happy is if you gave me a honest review on your favorite podcast player, whether that's Apple, Spotify, Joe Blow's House of Podcasts. I don't know which one you use, but if you could give me an honest review about the show that I've created to help you, that would be awesome. Thank you so much. And I will catch you on the next episode.